coming. Welcome to the Bass River Community Forum. I'm Tiffany Collins, and I'm the president of the Ward 2 Civic Association. Oh. Okay, we're good. Thank you to Mayor Cahill for working with us tonight on very, very short notice to pull this all together, and to pull the chambers together and to free up the counselors. And thank you for all the counselors for coming tonight, and the planning department. Bear with me, this is a lot for me. This is crazy, right? Look at this crowd. So, 2 years ago, I took over Ward 2. I took over during a pandemic, and I thought, well, we're going to come to the end of the pandemic, and hopefully we'll have Ward 2 still in existence and maybe a little bit of treasury. And look at this. It's crazy, right? Okay. And thank you to Darlene Wynn, our Director of Planning, and Emily Hutchings, our Assistant Planner, for helping us out tonight, too. And most of all, I want to thank, our Ward 2 Civic Association Board, Hannah Kerman-Martino, Vice President, Danielle Spang, our Secretary, who's also going to moderate tonight. She's taking over shortly. And Susie Lamont, Director of Special Projects for Ward 2, the Director of the Special Planning Committee. We couldn't have pulled this together. I definitely, clearly couldn't have done this, so thank you. I'm going to turn this over to Estelle, to Councilor Rand and Mayor Cahill in a minute. We're going to have a presentation from planning tonight. We have a board of experts, Beverly residents, experts in all their topics tonight. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. I have one more story to share, and then I'm going to turn it over to Estelle. So I was freaking out a couple weeks ago. We had kind of a bumpy Civic Association meeting, and we had a lot going on. So we have Bass River, and we have National Grid, and so much going on right now in the city, and not just Ward 2, but in the whole city. And I was just out of my mind. And Estelle said to me, "Isn't this a good problem to have? Aren't these good problems to have?" And I know that there are topics here tonight, and there's a lot of stress, and there's a lot of tension, and this is a big deal. This is a big issue. But think about what else is going on in the world, and think about where we are, and really, this is a good problem to have. It really, really is. And on that note, thank you, Estelle.
Thank you, Tiffany, and thank you. I want to really thank the leadership from the Ward 2 Civic Association. I think they have just excelled in the past 2 years, and actually just, in the past 8 years. This is our 9th year of kind of being reinvigorated, and the leadership team never fails to bring forward really important topics that affect Ward 2, but also if you look around, I see some of the most amazing people from all over the city. So and some new faces too. So I'm so glad you're here. And I guess I'll build off of Tiffany's story. So you may not agree that these are good problems to have, but here's where I'm coming from. I think I'm looking around tonight, and what I would like to see come out of tonight, and what I would like to work with the mayor and our planning department on, is thinking creatively about this space. So a lot of times we come together and it feels like something is a done deal and your input doesn't matter. And I really, really believe that in this instance, when it comes to the Bass River rezoning, this is a major planning puzzle. This is a space that floods. It's a space that's zoned currently for a use that we don't necessarily want to see in our future, like a storage facility, right? That's not necessarily how we want to serve our community with that space either. So some of the things that I mean when I say think creatively are Imagine what if the city bought part of those parcels and then split them up for development and park space. Imagine what you really want out of that space that's kind of a reasonable compromise for our community and our needs, but also it will change. That space will change. So I really like to see the creative minds in here and just encourage everybody to think about this as a major puzzle. And I know our planning department is thinking about it like that too. It's amazing to hear some of the things that they've come up with, but also really important to know that nothing is set in stone right now. So your being here is really important, and I'm looking forward to hearing your questions and your ideas. So thank you. And I think it's over to you
now. So thank you, Tiffany, and the Ward 2 Civic Association team, and thank you, Councilor Rand. Let me quickly acknowledge my colleagues in local government. Fortunately, we've got a whole lot of our city council here. Let's see. We've got Ward 6 City Councilor Matt St. Hilaire, Ward 1 City Councilor Todd Rotundo, at-large City Councilor Hannah Bowen. We move around the room. Ward 4 City Councilor Scott Hausman. Ward 3 City Councilor Steve Crowley, City Councilor at Large Brendan Sweeney, Ward 5 City Councilor Kathleen Feldman, City Council President and at Large Julie Flowers. Did I miss anybody? Any school committee members here? Oh, my colleague on the school committee, Jeff Silva from Ward 4. And what? Oh, yes, our planning board members. It matters who's on the planning board, so you want to raise your hand if you hear from the planning board. Ellen Flannery, Ellen Hutchinson, okay? And I'll explain that in a minute. Matt Kubitis is here from Senator Joan Lovely's office. Thank you, Matt. And did I miss anybody in that sense? Okay, so I'm going to speak briefly and then turn it to Darlene. Just a couple thoughts. The point on the planning board. When we're ready to move forward with the proposal for an overlay along the Bass River, the process is that the City Council and Planning Board will likely hold a joint public hearing, after which the Planning Board will they'll get together and they'll determine what kind of a recommendation to make to the City Council, and then the City Council will have responsibility for voting on an overlay proposal. So I want to lead by saying there are a lot of moving pieces. This is a process. We have been trying to do what's our job as the people you elected to serve you and really serve the whole community and trying to move the community in directions that make sense. We're trying to listen, we're trying to adjust. And I will say that at this point, we had been working off of a timetable of hoping to go to the City Council this spring. We said to you that their calendar fills up with budget by the end of May, beginning of June. I'm going to say tonight that we're not going to try to put anything in front of them this spring. Okay? I think our conversations to date have been really important ones and have helped us all in how we're thinking about this. We've been doing a lot of work internally on trying to find the right formula to meet what at present are seem hard to reconcile needs. So we know we continue to need more affordable housing. We know that there are concerns in the neighborhoods in downtown and in Ryle Side. I think the concern around traffic is one that we're looking hard at and trying to find the right responses, the right formula. And I think part of that is going to be, as we look at the Bass River waterfront, and Councilor Rand said it, trying to be creative and kind of reimagining it. We know we continue to need affordable housing. We look for a formula that demands more affordable housing in what may come there than currently. We also know that there's minimal public access along the Bass River right now on that side of the river. And at point of redevelopment of any land along that Bass River, that's where the state has a hook to require that more meaningful public access be provided. So there's that. So when you think of more affordable housing, when you think of meaningful public access and public spaces to enjoy, some commercial development along there in addition to some residential, and then trying to make sure that whatever may get built in any redevelopment along there over time gets built to the right standards, gets built to be buildings that don't contribute to further greenhouse gas emissions, things like that. So we're really determined to try to find a right size for what you may see there eventually, a right formula all in all that, you know, if we're able to achieve it, it'll be a set of decisions that maybe will be not just acceptable, but maybe desirable to a strong majority of everybody here. That's our goal. Not, you know, we don't assume it's going to happen easily, but I think that's where the involvement that you folks have had to date and that we want to continue to have in working through this with you has really helped us. It's a process, it's a journey, and that's why we've determined that, you know, rather than try to force fit it over the next 6 to 8 weeks, we've got some more work to do with you all. So with that said, Darlene Wynn is our city planning director. She's going to share a few thoughts before we turn it over to Danielle. Okay? Okay.
As the mayor said, Darlene Wynn, I'm the planning director for the city. Just looking at time, I know we've got a very well-planned agenda, and the mayor said a lot of things that I might have also said, so I'll just jump through. I decided in doing this presentation to take a step back. I don't want to get into like a lot of the details of design standards and zoning, but I want to help because I felt like after the last meeting in Ryleside, we need to talk a little bit about where we are and how we got here, what we're trying to do, and really what is zoning and what's the idea behind this. So why are we discussing new zoning for the Bass River area? We're talking about a zoning overlay district. This has been a priority, and a number of plans are identified as a recommendation in a number of plans throughout the history of the city, going back 20 years. Its proximity to the depot train station is an ideal location for additional development, both for housing and commercial uses. Already that entire area is already developed. As the mayor mentioned, the opportunity to redevelop these properties creates a greater opportunity for opening up the Bass River for public access and walkways along the waterfront and access to the river. It's also an opportunity for us to address climate resilience and mitigation along the river, which in the last few years we've looked at and realized is a greater problem and a greater issue to solve than we had realized when we were talking about this in 2017 and back in 2002. As the mayor mentioned, they're helping to meet the city's housing need, as well as, we know that is something that's hard to define, and we can talk about it a little bit later, but we know that housing is really important, especially affordable housing, and the opportunity to redevelop this property gives opportunities to create additional affordable housing. New investment creates economic development opportunities for the city, connecting the Bass River more to downtown, and then also just creating a great place. I think that should be the ultimate goal, somewhere that everybody in Beverly feels like they can go and be proud of and have access to. So just over really quickly, I won't read them all. These are all the plans that reference the rezoning of the Bass River Overlay District for mixed-use redevelopment, and they're all available on a city website. Just highlighting the Bass River Vision Plan in 2014 was when we really started to talk about this and how to implement it. I didn't start here until 2015. In around 2017, we started talking about specifics of a zoning ordinance, and then decided to wait after we heard, we were talking then about 60 to 75 feet in height. We heard some of the numbers were a little too much. So we were like, well, let's do a master plan. We'll take a look at it. We'll use the master plan as the opportunity to flesh out some of those ideas. We ended up with our master plan very late in 2020, where we did take some time during our public process fleshing out some of those ideas for the Bass River. I think the mayor talked a little bit about this, so I won't dwell too much on it, but we are also, in addition to kind of going through this public process, one of the other things that came out of the master planning process and some recent development projects is that residents were interested in a greater quality of design standards and looking at what actually the buildings look like that are being built in the city. So we are working on a project with a consultant right now to help us refine those design standards, to think about what's required to go into the zoning ordinance, what we can require in terms of buildings, how they look, how they sit on the lot, and also what would be guidelines, which are more recommendations. I thought I had a slide there. Maybe it comes up later. But, so hopefully you can see. It's not great, but this is the area that we were talking about, outlined in red. We already talked about the area to the left is the National Grid parcel. We talked about taking that out of the area. The likelihood of that being redeveloped is very low. And then the area below, we'd never actually really considered having in it, but on one map it was shown, so don't consider that either. But so we're talking about from the train station, to the right, including those parcels. And it's about 10 acres of land now. So just a little background. So we've been showing, you've seen some schematics, you've seen some drawings, some squares on maps and things like that. Those are just ideas that we've been generating and using to frame the design standards and how we think about what could sit on this property. What we're talking about here is not a plan, we're talking about zoning. Zoning is the municipal law that outlines how land is used in the city, and we can set forth, so which uses are allowed in different districts. We have 18 districts in the city. What are the rules around buildings that are built in those zones? How high can they be? How far do they have to be set back from the front of the lot, from the side, from the back? There are requirements such as how many parking spaces for different uses, signage regulations. We have inclusionary housing regulations that set forth a certain percentage of affordable units for every so many market rate units. So for right now we have 12% of all units in a project have to be affordable. If you have more than 6 units, at 80% of area median income, and 8% have to be affordable, 8% have to be affordable at 60% of area median income. So, and then as I mentioned before, design standards are kind of another layer that we're looking to add onto it, or include in the zoning overlay district. And then an overlay district means that everything that is allowed now would continue to be allowed in the industrial uses. This provides another layer, another option to create additional uses, and those uses would be subject to the design standards and the dimensional standards that we will talk about. Hopefully, that's a very fast primer on zoning. So currently, the uses on the left are some of the allowable uses in the general industrial district. And the uses on the right are uses that we're talking about, considering being allowed in a Bass River overlay district. And as I said, the uses on the left will still be allowed, the existing businesses will still be allowed to continue using and operating their space, expanding their space under the underlying zoning, or they could propose a new use and they would have to meet the new design standards. So these are some of the elements that we're talking about under an overlay district that have been discussed over time. Certain uses that would be allowed. A height of 5 stories has been discussed. It's been called 4/1, understanding that there needs to be some parking or retail on the ground floor. We're talking about putting in maximum floor plate sizes, so how big a building could be. So you wouldn't be able to have one massive building on a huge lot. Setbacks, how far they're set back from the front or the rear. What uses should be on the ground floor, talking about activated uses to the extent that we can, understanding that we also have to balance the flood risk in that area. And then parking. Those are some of the key zoning elements that we're talking about and have been discussed. So as I mentioned before in the January meeting that we had on Zoom, that was really about our design standards project, and we looked at a lot of great pictures and a lot of designs, and that was really for us to understand what the trade-offs were between a lot of the things that the mayor had talked about: open space, meaningful open space, having to have new roadways that provided connections, whether they're pedestrian or transportation roadways, affordable housing, how high the buildings are, all those things. Sorry. Sorry. Leonard, there we go. That happens like every 5 days. So this is just an example of some of the things we were talking about, taking into account, like basically trying to figure out how much land from the river is the right amount for us that we want to keep from being developed, so that we can use that both as open space but also for resiliency measures. So we don't want to allow development that's going to prohibit us from down the line taking a necessary action to protect that area from rising floodwaters or severe storms. And I think I won't spend too much time on this because that's what we're here for today, to talk more about some of the things that everybody in this room is interested in or has questions about. And I think that is it. Oh yes, this one. So we do have a website. I am updating I'm updating information there as I get it. All the presentations will be up there, and I'll have links to the videos from the meetings. Emily is helping me greatly in going through what is now an 8-page frequently asked questions document. So we have all of the questions that you guys have been sending us and asking us, and we are working really hard to get a very thorough document that we will then put up there to share with everybody. So, and send it out as well. On there too is a place to send comments. I have not seen a lot. It just goes to me directly. And then above that, sign up here. So if you want to be on the email list for more info. All right, you want me to get out of here?
Okay, and now we're going to have 30 minutes of some guest speakers for Beverly residents with experience and expertise in certain areas. And then we have some questions for the city, and then after the half hour, we'll be open for public comment. And we're just going to have people make a line to the podium at that time. So Donald Preston, you're our first guest, and he is an affordable housing advocate. Oh, sorry. It's not up.
So thank you very much. My name is Donald Preston. I reside here in Beverly at 3 Pickett Street. Have been here for about 40 years, 50 years. My wife is correcting me. I've been involved in affordable housing since 2000. I started with the Y when we formed a group called Y Housing, and then it moved on from there to become Beverly Affordable Housing Coalition, and then after that, it moved into becoming the North Shore CDC, and along the way, I became the ED of the Habitat for Humanity North Shore, and I'm currently on the board of Habitat for Humanity Essex County. Habitat works on home ownership, not on rental, so I'm not speaking in a capacity as Habitat, but as a affordable housing advocate. One of the areas I'd like to go, and this is the next, is when we come to the questions of affordability and how we interpret what affordability is. The need for affordable housing in this city is as high as it is in all our surrounding cities and towns. Beverly has made some great inroads in partnership with Harbor Light and the YMCA in directing and producing more affordable housing at quite a nice economic range. But as we move into the needs, you can see right now, if you look on the flyers out in the hallway for the current projects that are being developed, the incomes that are being served are rather high. So we are in the HUD metro area, and with that, we have a median income of $120,000. That's what they say the median income is for this area, and that's from Boston all the way up to Seabrook. But actually, the median income in Beverly is $84,000. So if you want to do 40%, 60% of that, you're looking at those figures on the bottom. But the incomes for 40 to 60% are 50 to 80,000 in income based on the HUD figures, which are the commonly used figures and the, sort of the baseline we all go by. I'm advocating that we start addressing the actual median incomes in our communities when we're looking at producing affordable housing and saying that we're addressing people in the 40 to 60% area. I do not advocate for housing at the 80% level. That is available in other areas, but producing housing for people that are stepping out of housing authority units, moving away from Section 8 and going into the marketplace, there is a gap, and there's nothing that fills that. Habitat helps fill that in the ownership end, but in the rental end, it isn't there. So my first step would be is that I would recommend that 25% of the units on the site be affordable. And that is the same figure that is used if you were doing a 40B project. And also that all the units be on site and not created off-site, which is an option that is in our inclusionary zoning. But I would recommend that on this, all units be on site. The other is that we do try to keep it in the 40 to 60% range. And I know this is tough and it's going to be hard for a developer. It's going to be very difficult because the rents are going to be greatly reduced from what they could get. There's another tool that can be used, and that's a project-based voucher, but that has to be done in partnership with your housing authority. But that would be vouchers that would go with the project and make those units affordable all the time. So a person would come in, income qualify, use the voucher on that house and that unit, and then when they move on, the voucher is still there and would be used by the next family that income qualifies. So you'd be creating permanent affordable units there that would recycle all the time on that unit versus just a Section 8 voucher that can move. So these are the areas where I would recommend we start looking and try to incorporate into this project.
Thank you very much. Thank you, yes. And now we have two questions based on affordable housing issues. And so the first is this, yeah, that's fine. Is the city considering eliminating the payment in lieu of on-site affordable housing? And what actions would that require?
We haven't talked about eliminating the fee in lieu for affordable housing payment. We have talked about eliminating the off-site credit unit. And let me just tell you why, a little bit about the affordable housing, about the fee in lieu for affordable housing payment only applies to ownership properties, not rental properties. It's been used twice in the city's history, once for Pondview Lane when that subdivision was created, and the other time for the condos at Elliott Landing. And that generated about $750,000 in fees that we were able to reinvest through our affordable housing trust to help create additional affordable housing, such as Anchor Point, which is under construction now, to the Hardy Street project, and also Briscoe Village. So that tool can be useful, and when used in the right way. And I think it's important to note that it has only been used twice, and it's only eligible for ownership properties, not rental properties, which is a lot of what we have been seeing in the downtown. We did hear a lot of concern about being able to generate units off-site and have credit units. And it also seemed a little challenging to implement. So we are talking about maybe not allowing that as an option anymore. Let's see. I'll let you ask the other question.
And then will there be requirements to include some 2 to 3 bedroom units in the Bass River Overlay District, or is that left up to a developer's discretion?
Our zoning has been silent typically on unit sizes in multifamily projects, whether they're 1, 2, or 3 bedrooms. So we typically leave that up to the market to decide. There's a tension with larger units. People are concerned about school impacts or parking impacts, and so those things have to be weighed. I think most of the developments that have been built recently downtown have a small percentage of 2 bedrooms, but most of them are single bedrooms or studios. But we certainly know that's something we could evaluate. There are other towns that do have unit size requirements in their zoning, but we don't currently.
Okay, and then I'll invite Brad Jones, Energy and Sustainability Consultant.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Brad Jones, a resident over in Goat Hill. And when I'm not enjoying everything that Beverly has to offer, I'm a consultant working with both public and private companies and entities on energy and sustainability issues. And my wife has joked, this was an easy way of kind of showing some of the clients I've worked with over the years. I'm all set for my NASCAR career, and my car will have plenty of logos on it when we launch that. So in the projects that we get involved with, there's always really a balance of risk and reward. As on the new construction side, the project owners are really trying to minimize risks, maximize reward. And you also have various stakeholders on the projects as well, and every stakeholder has their own risks and rewards. And various stakeholders have different perspectives of what's the risk and what's the reward. So one of the things that we try to do is just work and identify areas where there's commonality to align those risks and rewards. And one thing on a community level that has worked very well is looking at some of the green building and sustainability initiatives. So what I'm going to talk about today, very high level, is just a few green building concepts. There's a variety of frameworks that are out there, like a LEED certification. I know the city's used LEED certification for several projects here. Some of the new school, I believe the police station might be seeking a LEED certification. So that's one framework. Details differ on those, but the overall structure and concepts are pretty much the same. So location and transportation, we hear a lot about transit-oriented development, particularly here in Ward 2 and downtown. But beyond that, there's other location considerations, not building in floodplains that are, at risk of damage shortly after project completions, taking a look at some of the other aspects such as access to community services and things along those lines. Next category, just at a very high level, sustainable sites. That is a little bit more about how you design the site itself. So looking at, avoiding how you're managing stormwater, rainwater on the site, looking at opportunities to minimize heat island effect, which I'll talk about that in just a second, limiting light pollution, things along those lines. So basically being a good neighbor for your neighbors. Water efficiency and energy efficiency, most people understand those concepts. How are you utilizing the resources that we have that are fairly limited? Energy efficiency and renewable energy components, whether that's an existing on-site or tapping into other resources off-site. Materials and resources, a little bit more about how you're managing flows of materials on the site, construction, recycling, but also the reuse of existing buildings and renovation of existing buildings rather than tearing them down and building new. And then indoor environmental quality is really kind of about the health and well-being of the occupants of the buildings themselves. So the heat island effect, I just wanted to touch on this real quick. So again, a lot of those concepts are fairly, I consider them to be fairly common sense. Sometimes they can be a little tricky. They've fancy words, if you will, but it's a relatively easy concept to get your head around. Basically, the red line there, or the dark line, is temperature, afternoon temperature in similar spaces, depending on the development type. So our more dense urban downtown areas tend to retain heat because of the materials that are there. They absorb the heat during the day, they retain the heat, and then later in the afternoon, the spaces haven't cooled down as much, as opposed to parkland, suburban areas, things like that. And so this is something that designers can take into account when they're developing their sites and designing their buildings and selecting materials. Again, it's something I think most people just inherently have a pretty good handle on. For instance, if we said on a late afternoon, on a sunny day, do you want, and you're looking to cool down a little bit, are you going to be in the more developed area, or are you going to go to a space that has a little bit more open space and green space? And so these are the types of things that become more and more important, I think, as we talk about global warming and climate change coming. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jen.
And now we have Jen Friedson from Green Beverly.
I haven't used one of these before. Is it the right arrow?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all. I'm Jen Friedson. I identify as a she, her pronoun, and I'm a longtime resident. I graduated college here. I'm a mom of kids in the school system, and I owned a sustainable event design business for almost 11 years out of Beverly, so I love this place. I'm currently working part-time with Green Beverly. We're a community hub for sustainable living, really kicking off this year as our first full year. And we're here as a resource. And so specifically in relationship to environmentalism, I should probably click the slide here. I'd like to speak to some of the potential risks of the Bass River overlay. particularly in relationship to considering contaminated sediment, as well as exploring the flood level risks. I'll do a really big picture here. So in terms of contaminated sediment, I really want to pose a question for us to think about. So understanding that progress is being made on dredging the contaminated sediment within the Bass River navigation channel, here's the question I'd just love us to think about as we're considering what to put in this space. Are there any plans to address the contamination in the shallow shoreline areas outside of the channel where the potential for exposure will be greater after site development with the expected increased shoreline access? So just to give a little sense of what I'm speaking of, essentially, if we put lots of housing and we create beautiful walkways for people to be drawn to wanting to enjoy that shoreline, we need to be mindful that there are contaminants within the river and the riverbeds. And so if we're not assessing how to either make the shoreline unapproachable for going into or other items, then we may be risking bringing up and activating some of that contaminated area and potentially even bringing it out into our homes, et cetera. Also, the more abundant group of individuals that are accessing the shoreline, the more likelihood that there are more animals, and animal waste can add to the problem, not take away from it if we're not thinking, holistically about how we're addressing this. So just something to think about. And I want to stage this next slide before I wrap up. I'm sure many of you have heard about the 100-year storms or 100-year floods. In past generations, less significant repeats of large storms and floods were the case. With climate change rising, the storms are actually becoming more intense in a more frequent cadence, and therefore, especially in relationship to flooding, which would affect the potential of this building if not considered properly, it can really affect particularly the first floor of these buildings. And so there are graphs that are modeled, many that you can just quickly Google online, that are showing sort of the best case, worst case, and somewhere in the middle scenarios of if we reduce our greenhouse emissions, essentially, that in relationship to how quickly the flood levels will rise will affect, for example, the shoreline. So the IPCC, which is an international group really working to capture our human impacts on climate change, are showing that we're unfortunately on the worst case track currently in their 2022 model, which means that I just want to encourage the groups that are assessing this property to really think about, are we being conservative enough with how we're building or creating the vision for the buildings? So for example, just in a really practical way, and this is great, last sentence, you can see in this model that on the first floor, and this was actually taken from a previous meeting here, there are people dining. And I believe even in some instances there might be, electrical units, et cetera, on the first floor. We really need to be mindful that we're watching those being on a most conservative level so that they aren't, within my generation at least, wiped out. So I'll wrap that up. Thank you.
Thank you.
I was very nervous, sorry.
Okay, and on to some sustainability questions. Will green building standards be required in citywide design standards going forward, whether for new construction or for renovating or repurposing existing buildings?
Can I take 1 second and just respond to Jennifer or Jen? So just the last point, I think the last point you made really highlighted what I very briefly said about the difference between 2017 and what we're doing now in 2020, where our 2017 draft ordinance talked about ground floor uses, active uses as much as possible. And now one of the puzzles and the challenges that the mayor references, how do we maintain an active, publicly accessible place and make this feel like a public place while also recognizing that, the first floors are going to be potentially floodable? And what types of uses could we have there that make sense? And how much, what is that balance between active commercial public fronting uses and uses that are more inclined to tolerate flood. So just wanted to address that quickly, sorry.
And Darlene, I know you're going to go to the,
Yeah.
excuse me, the preset questions, but to answer your other question, Jen, we have been using the most conservative models on the 2070 flood projections. Thanks.
So I'll repeat the question. Will green building standards be required in design standards going forward, whether new construction or renovating, repurposing existing buildings? I have a really long answer, so I'm going to try and summarize because they gave me some of these questions ahead of time. So we are contemplating that the proposed overlay district would include a resiliency checklist to demonstrate what we want to see addressed in any new development. Requiring information on green building standards that will be used and information for developers related to their buildings and sites on how they're going to be resilient to climate impacts. Now, a checklist is not a required part of the zoning, but that's just a way that we think in the interim, without additional information, we're encouraging and showing developers, we want you to do this, potentially. So that's similar to what Boston uses. And then we are continuing to look into what we can require as part of zoning and what would be required of the state building code. So by law, zoning cannot regulate anything that is regulated in the state building code. So as I mentioned before, zoning is about uses. And so we can't overstep that. So we have to kind of evaluate that and tread that lightly. The state is currently developing a net zero building code that municipalities may choose to adopt as a specialized stretch code in the future. So I expect that that's something that the city would strongly consider. And we already have adopted the stretch building code that enabled us to be designated a green community by the state. And this stretch code will be updated on the same timeline as the net zero code and will automatically apply to Beverly. Anything else you wanted to add on that?
That's good.
Okay.
Thanks. And adding residential density will exacerbate existing conditions downtown, such as heat islands, stormwater runoff, flooding of the Bass River. How will this be proactively mitigated?
Sure. So, I think primarily, one of the key points is that our city kind of master plan policy has established that redevelopment in areas that are already built is generally more environmentally sustainable than redeveloping open space. And so we are trying to minimize the areas in the city that are currently green and forested that become subdivided and built upon. And that's one of the reasons why we see this area as an opportunity. So as Bass River area is entirely paved and built up, heat island impacts occur there now, where there's extensive impervious surface, and we expect that new development will improve the heat island condition because of the requirements for open space that we put into place, both by the Chapter 91 wetlands regulations, at least for providing public access, and our own that we expect to have in place. New street trees, additional landscaping, and green building requirements such as rooftop renewables or green roof practices. So, our goal is that we're actually mitigating the heat island effect by allowing redevelopment of the area. Stormwater must be addressed on site already, but by any new development under existing regulations, and the engineering department reviews that for all projects, and there's very strict requirements, and they are continuing to roll out better management and enforcement of those, constantly. And then we expect that any future developers or even existing property owners will need to put in place measures to protect their own property from anticipated increased sea level rise or future flooding during storm events. For the city, the climate action planning process identified the need to establish a strong plan for resiliency along the banks of the Bass River, and that's something that we are also working on concurrently.
Thank you. And we'll invite up Erin Mearns from Coast to Coast Paddle. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Aaron Mearns. My wife, Ashley Skomersky, and I own Coast to Coast Paddle. If we haven't had the pleasure of meeting you yet, we run kayak and paddleboard rentals out of Independence Park. And we've been doing that 8 seasons. This is our 9th season coming up. We live in Beverly. We live right down on Stone Street. And through the business, we've had a really cool opportunity to work and play on the city's waterways, which has been fantastic. But we also get to hear a lot from residents and visitors to the city about what their impressions are of Beverly as a coastal community, as a cities surrounded by water. Make sure I'm holding it the right way. All right. Excuse me. So the way we see Beverly from our perspective, it's a really cool city, especially when compared to other towns along the North Shore. We're surrounded, at least the downtown area, we're surrounded on 3 sides by water. We've got oceanfront, we've got harbor, we've got tidal rivers that even have a little salt marsh left in them, which is great. And when you look at other towns along the North Shore, there's not a lot of access to the water because of a lot of large private development. But in Beverly, you have at least visual access to the water in a lot of parts of the city. A large number of residents live within a mile of the water, a lot of different waterways. And so we really are like a great coastal community that has access to some degree to the water. And I kind of keep coming back to it's a lot of visual access because we have these public ways scattered throughout the city, which are great and allow people to get down to the water, but it kind of stops there. Some of them literally stop at a cliff, so you can't quite get to the water from there. And what we hear a lot is people wanting a need for better access to the water, more ways to be able to engage with the water, whether it's through fishing, kayaking and paddleboarding, boating, sailing, whatever it is. Right now, there's only 2 public boat ramps for boats, one down at Sandy Point, which is beautiful, but doesn't have really any parking around it, and then the other down at the Bolomat, which is a little, nobody quite knows who's running that right now and if you can use it and whatnot. But what we found is that there's a real eagerness for people to be able to engage in the water, and if you take down barriers to that, or if you make it easier for people to do it, they're going to gravitate towards it. So for example, on the right there is down at Independence Park, the Harbor Management Authority installed 3 different kayak racks for residents to store their kayaks and paddleboards on. Those got filled up really quickly, and from our kind of vantage point down there at the beach, we see people paddling and engaging with the water, using the water a lot more than they did before those racks were there. And so we think when you make it easy, people will go out and use it. And so we think there is a call for more of that. And those kayak racks are around several parks throughout the city. But because the Bass River specifically, is not only under this concern, but is also such a beautiful and an easy place for people, or could be an easy place for people to be able to engage with. We would just kind of hope that any development of that would consider, having access not just along the water, but actually to the water too. We think that when people are allowed to engage with the water, they connect with the water and they find out that they love the water in a way maybe they didn't know they did, and then they want to protect it and conserve it for future generations. So we think that's important. And this is on the last slide. We on a 13-degree day, I think in January, we had a couple of people take to the river, and it warmed up all the way up to 21 degrees that day. But we thought if we can get people out there on that cold day, I think on a nice summer day, we can get a lot of people out there and enjoying it. That would be cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now we have Stella Lensing, a landscape architect and planner. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Stella Lensing. I'm a landscape architect and a planner, and I've spent most of my career planning greenways, which are linear corridors that not only protect our ecological and cultural resources, but they also create wonderful recreational opportunities for people, and they help connect communities to these resources. And I'm really excited about this opportunity because I've been in Beverly for 7 years, and I've never really been able to get down to the Bass River, except for some of the public land already accessible. And I think this would give us a great opportunity to see more of the river and connect with it. And not only will we hopefully be able to paddle down the river, but ride our bikes, go for walks. And so that's what I wanted to talk about this evening. This is one of the projects that I've worked on, and it's been highly successful in connecting several communities along the Neponset River. And many of the people who now have access have told me that they never ever knew there was a river in their backyards. And it really has made a huge difference in their lives. And you know, you don't need a lot of space for it, but I think you at least need, we can do a little bit more than what Chapter 91 is going to give us the hook to do, to create public access. I think we should be a little bit more proactive and set the standards for adequate access so that we can also mitigate for floodplain, flood storage, and all those climate resiliency things that we were talking about earlier this evening. So that's my little thing about greenways. Thank you.
Thank you. We have just 2 more questions, and then we'll be open for public comments and questions. One, the McPherson Youth Center and Skate Park is already city-owned recreational use land. Can the city tie into adjacent parcels to include public recreation facilities for skating, dog walking, bird watching, kayak programs, community paddling, etc.?
I'll start with that one, Danielle. So first, thanks to everybody who presented. This has been some great information. So McPherson, some of you know, we just recently brought on board an owner's project manager to help us look at the McPherson Youth Center property and see what it should be going forward. It's ours. It's dedicated to the needs of our youth. It will continue to be. We also are trying to take advantage of a recognition through COVID that our youth and teens have some incredible needs that we've got to really focus on meeting. So we're going to be looking at what they offer programmatically, what the building provides, and how to improve on that. And so that's a process that's just getting underway, just getting started. We'll be looking for a lot of neighborhood and community involvement to try to make sure that that resource continues to be what our kids need it to be going forward. So I just mentioned that because you're right, it's adjacent to the softball field at Innocenti Park and then the properties we're talking about here. As I think you well know, we as a community don't own any of the other properties. However, if and when they are redeveloped in any fashion, that's when Chapter 91 at the state level kicks in and we have opportunities. And who was it who just said, we want to get more than what Chapter 91 provides as a minimum. We're talking, you looked at the slide Darlene had up, and between what we all want for public access and enjoyment and what we believe we're going to need for the resilience of our waterfront with that, what's expected for sea level rise, which will really be problematic at the high tide in the middle of a storm. That's when the real flooding happens, right, that we're concerned with. So we're looking at that being 50 feet or more from the waterfront. So that's a part of this whole calculation that's going to take some time still. How do we ensure that those things are provided? And this list of amenities that people want, I mean, that's an open conversation, right? When we reach a workable program here that will allow for some redevelopment, for some housing that's needed, for some commercial, we're going to want that public space. We're going to want more affordability. We're going to want the buildings to meet standards. We're going to want high design standards. There's got to be a way to pay for all that. And so that's the challenge. The person who owns and wants to develop that property has to be able to pay for all that and still make money, right? So we're not there, but that's the point of all this. I hope that's helpful to answer that question.
Yeah, thank you. And then Beverly lacks, I think it came up a little bit, a public boat ramp for larger boats or one that works at all tides. Will the city create more public boating and recreational access to water that people expect in a coastal community?
We, in 2019, conducted a harbor and waterfront planning process, and I had to go back and look into that a little bit to refresh myself on some of the recommendations in there, and that plan is also available on our website. Creating new boat ramps for larger craft specifically was not identified as a recommendation in that plan. However, it did suggest looking at existing ramps to improve functionality, particularly for tides. I mean, also a number of different locations for smaller craft, improvement to access points, and maybe creation of some new access points specifically for, things like kayaks and paddleboards, things that people can kind of walk in themselves. But I think, and then there's additional recommendations for slips and moorings, which might relate more to larger craft, but, it's an ongoing conversation, I think, too. I would point, this, as the mayor said, the city doesn't own any of that land currently in the Bass River area that we're talking about. We don't even own the boat ramp. It's not actually public. But, I think we would encourage and really look for, so Chapter 91 requires certain different levels of publicly accessible uses and water-dependent uses, and certain water-dependent uses might be required, or might be an option that aren't actually open space. So things like marinas and other things that are more industrial in nature could still be allowed under the Chapter 91 regulations. So I think, as Stella mentioned, kind of looking for the balance of what the state laws would require, what the city wants to put on top of that, and can put on top of that by law, and what the community wants, and finding the nexus of that is part of what we're still continuing to flesh out.
Thanks, thank you. And now thank you to everyone who came for your patience in getting through this presentation. And if you have comments or questions that you would like to bring forward, please feel free to come to the podium and start a line. We're not going to do a sign-in sheet today. Go ahead. And if you could just say your name and what ward you're from, that would be helpful.
Dane Rachavati, Ward 2. Oh, that's loud. First of all, I'd like to say that I know it was encouraging to see some people that want to keep some green areas and some area we can see the water, because besides that island heat effect that we're getting, I mean, we're getting the valley effect too. I don't know if anyone's ever heard that. It's becoming like a valley, because every time I turn around or read the newspaper, there's another humongous building being put up, and I'm not sure why we have to have more and more affordable housing. Like, are we trying to bring the whole world into Beverly? Because Beverly's I think we should vote on changing the name to Beverlyn instead of Beverly, because it's looking more and more like Lynn. And when I hear people talk about how they love this city, it's not going to be the city that they love anymore pretty soon. It's not going to be. And places that used to take me 2 minutes to get there now take like 20 minutes to get there. And if I think we'd have more construction than Boston. I might move to New York or Boston, because this city is becoming overrun. And the other thing that, the mayor and everyone talks about how they want to make everything green. And as was brought out, you keep putting all these buildings and it creates more heat. You bring all these people in with their cars and everything. It's not going to be a green city. And, so that's what I'm really worried about, is why we have to keep cramming it in. And I live near the belly of the beast. I live right near where all this development is going on. And I tried to stop a project, and all this traffic now that I didn't want goes through, people speeding through my neighborhood all the time. And a woman talked about how this, all over the place, there's a woman that gives lectures, and she talked about how all over the city, all over the country now, that they put up all these huge buildings and they have commercial on the bottom. I worry about our resources like water. Are we going to have any water left? I work at a restaurant, and I can't believe how much water gets used every day. And they're putting in more and more restaurants. And so that's in affordable housing. We just had people who live here, homeowners, all their taxes just went up, property taxes just went up. So is affordable housing, am I going to be paying to help other people to come in here? I'm going to be paying for their affordable housing? How about helping the people who actually live here? I have a lot more that I'd like to say that is really annoying and irritating and frightening about what's happening to Beverly, but my time is up, unfortunately.
Thank you very much for your concerns. You have another person to come up and speak? I'm just going to let people keep talking unless we have a question for the city.
I'm Ron Gennard. I live in Melvin Avenue in Beverly. I'm a lifelong citizen here. I grew up on the Bass River, okay? I don't care if you say it's polluted or whatever. I ate flounder out of that river all my life, okay? But you won't find it there now, okay? As far as open space along that river, you have a walkway from Elliott Street all the way to Bridge Street right now, behind the park, right? Through the Bass River Yacht Club, behind the McDonald's. You ever see anybody there? If you walk down it, it looks a little dirty too, so nobody's going to pay attention. So you want to continue that walkway all the way up to Goats Hill? Why does anybody want to walk along the walkway of the river when they have Dane Street Beach and Lynch Park? That's only one of it, okay? As far as this flooding with this doom and gloom, if you're going to put any buildings on that property of the bowling alley, and probably the lumber yard next, then you better put them on steel pilings. That's what you're worried about. That's all I got. As far as housing, I don't even want to go there.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments and input. We have anyone else who'd like to speak?
Hi there, I'm Estelle Rand, Ward 2 City Councilor. I live up on Agate Street, and this has been really amazing, and I'm just going to commend the Civic Association again for their amazing leadership. I guess this is a good opportunity for me to say that in 2014, as a councilor and working with the mayor, we allocated $1.1 million to purchase the Girl Scout camp property. And then just very recently, we, that was almost $1 million, I think. Yeah, almost $1 million, 950,000. And then recently, we allocated 1.1 for sort of the preservation of Moraine Farm. And I'm really curious and would love to work with you, Mayor, on purchasing some property down there. And I know it's not as easy as that, because no one in this room that I'm aware of owns the lots we're talking about, but I think it's a great opportunity to make that extra investment in our urban part of the city, to continue what's already really nice park space and to actually have control over the land that we have so many ideas about in terms of floodability, public access, and how we want that Chapter 91 property to look. So I'm curious if you're considering that. I know you've heard me ask you that before within the steering committee, so hopefully you're prepared for me to ask you that tonight.
Councilor Rand. She's really good, honestly. For you Ward 2 folks, she's an incredible representative. We respect her and love working with her. If we are able to find a parcel that, that we can enter into that kind of a conversation with the property owner. I mean, there are a number of parcels in this whole mix. I think one of the things we're finding is that an overlay may not include all of them at the end of the day. You're right. We've tried to be really thoughtful, and together we've been able to nail down a couple of meaningful parcels of land in other parts of town. I will say, and I don't want to sound self-serving at all, but this probably will sound that way. I was your state representative for 10 years, and I thank you all for that privilege. And in the late 90s, we were able to, a bunch of us together, were able to secure state funding to buy Greens Hill. So, there is a parcel of land, and it matters. It makes a difference in all our lives. But, back to the question, absolutely. If there's an opportunity there, and I would say we're already looking, that could well be a part of this answer. Because again, there's a lot of acreage down there if it were all to be a part of an overlay. At this point, given some of our kind of layered things that we're trying to accomplish here, it may not make sense that all the parcels that you've been looking at for the last couple of years with us are part of it.
Thank you for that answer. I think I want to say that I do believe that Beverly, because of our position and our sort of status and our great schools and open space and access to the water and the highways and the commuter rail, we have the leverage, I think, to create that kind of opportunity as a city government. So I'm ready to work with you on that. And I also think it's that's legacy building. I mean, that can be your legacy of, look, you created a park along the Bass River that everybody is going to enjoy for for generations to come. So, thank you.
Good evening. My name is Michael Hakim. I am a Ward 2 resident. I'm also a landscape architect and professional planner. I believe, I laud the city, the planning department, and the government for moving in this direction. Land uses change over time. There was a time in our history when those industrial uses were appropriate along the river. there was water-dependent uses, but that time's come and gone, and it's time to look to the future, and I think that you're doing that. I think the direction that we're going to upzone, which is really what we're doing, can only benefit not just residents of the city, but every property owner along there, whether they choose to keep their existing land use or they choose to redevelop their property or sell to a developer to install a higher and better land use. I think it's all good, and I think it's the future of Beverly for a lot of the reasons that you've all stated. Its proximity to downtown, the railroad, and so forth. I'm here to ask you to seriously consider a full rezoning rather than an overlay zone. And I want to tell you why. If this entire district if this district along the river gets rezoned, there's no detriment to any property owner. None at all. Their property values have risen. Their existing land use, if they choose to keep them, become legally pre-existing non-conforming uses. They lose nothing. And if they choose to redevelop their property, it's only going to be beneficial for them. The reason I'm suggesting a full rezoning rather than an overlay is because you run the risk with an overlay of somebody coming in and proposing a development that conforms to the old zoning. And it would be a zoning consistent development proposal. And I can't imagine how a beautiful new redevelopment area with a brand new industrial building right smack in the heart of it would really benefit the city. So I would really be interested to know, have you considered a real rezoning? And if not, or if you've considered it and discarded this recommendation, what's the reasoning for that?
Yeah, if you'd like to respond, you can.
Go ahead.
Okay. I know that when we were talking, between 2014 and 2016, 17, when we put forth and we're working out that version in 2017, it was originally conceived as a new zoning district. And the planning director at the time had a significant number of conversations with existing property owners, some of whom may have been National Grid, I think, that were concerned about the ability to make improvements to their property under the existing zoning. And there may have been other reasons, but at that point, we did switch over to talking about it as an overlay district instead of a complete zoning change. And I can look into my notes to get more, if there's more history, but that's kind of what I recall.
So,
And I'll say this, Mike, what Darlene just said, you know, this concern expressed that once you're pre-existing non-conforming, it's harder to make improvements. I'm happy to look at it again with you. I mean, look, we're here tonight talking about a path we're trying to travel and nothing being carved in stone. So I'm happy to look at it with you. We're happy to look at it with you.
yeah, I mean, times change, conditions change, and what was appropriate in 2017 may not be appropriate in 2022. And people create zoning. People create local ordinances, and it's not a difficult task to create provisions in that ordinance that protect existing landowners and existing land uses that would make it much more straightforward for them to improve their properties with their land uses. I'll call them obsolete or old land uses, but it doesn't have to be more difficult. And that's just all in the preparation of the codes. Thank you.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Mark White, Ward 2, lifelong resident. I guess my time is more about thoughts and maybe possibly questions too. But I was at the Ryle Side meeting as well, and I remember the discussion about the traffic, and it kind of got at least it seemed to me that it got dismissed as when somebody approaches us with a development, they'll do the traffic study. And to me, that almost seems like we're going backwards. I think like we need that traffic study beforehand because, as most people who live on Goat Hill where I live and obviously live in Ryle Side, which is directly affected by that, know that Bridge Street and Route 62 are already, a disaster as far as traffic getting out to 128. And if you go into 128 at the end of the day, you already know that that's horrible, if you're going to go towards Peabody rather than Gloucester. But, so the traffic thing is already an issue. And if we're going to change that zoning, I have to respectfully disagree with the last speaker and say that the property down there is not, we haven't it doesn't need to change. We have a functional lumberyard down there that is as busy as it ever is. And we have a marina down there that appears to me a boatyard that looks pretty busy. And we have a shelter for people down there right now that is, providing a service for people who are in need. And I'm not against affordable housing because my daughter works in human services, and those guidelines that you were showing there are probably more than she makes. And she can't live in Beverly. So, affordable housing these days is pretty much your average Joe based on those numbers that I saw anyway. So I think opening up to that, because what we saw on Rantoul Street in the last few years has not been affordable housing. Maybe they have a few units, I guess, but those $2,100 a month studio apartments are pretty obscene for
And I'm just gonna, sorry,
pricing.
we've run into time, but
Okay.
if you would like to perhaps answer whether the city's considering doing any traffic studies as far as the density of the density that would be allowed under the overlay?
Well, I'd say this, thanks, Mark. I think we all recognize that traffic is something that needs a better answer. And so you're right in terms of how things typically, go under zoning law. When somebody proposes a development, they've got to do a traffic study. We did a traffic study on the the Bridge Street project. And there was some confusion at the last meeting with me and with Mr. Gagnon as to what we had said about it. Went back to the traffic engineer on the Bridge Street project, and typically, and this is what happened in this instance, they project out a certain amount of growth based on models. Wasn't based on our own neighborhood and the projection for what might happen along the Bass River waterfront. So I think that leaves us needing to go back and do some work there around what we see that different iterations of this, right? Where can we land on a total new traffic projection? Be it, units of housing, be it some commercial, that, how much can we project that into what the roads can handle? So that's a part of the calculation that we're still working on.
Well, if you change the zoning, you're going to have a fire sale down there. That lumberyard's going to go. Everything's going to go. Obviously, the Bolomat and Kegler's Den have moved on, but if you change the zoning for that whole area, we're just going to have a fire. Who's not going to sell? And then we're just going to end up with another Rantoul Street, and I think that's just going to be a disaster for us.
And to your, I understand your points, Mark. To your question about the affordable, that's one of the things that we mentioned earlier. There are a number of affordable units in those developments based on the inclusionary zoning ordinance. Not enough, I agree. And that's where, based on where our needs are, that's what we're trying to build more more of that into before we move forward with anything.
Thank you. And we're going to go to the next person, please. And if you could state your name and what ward you reside in.
Yeah, George Gomes, Ward 1. Appreciate you guys letting me crash your party here. I think this is a good project, I think, in general, and I know I'm probably out of step with a lot of people in the room on that. I think we have an enormous housing supply problem in this city, in this region. If you look at, I would assume the majority of people here look at what has happened to your own home values in the last couple of years, and then think about your kids or your grandkids and whether they're able to afford those houses. I understand that maybe people in the room wouldn't pay $2,000 for a studio or a 1-bedroom or whatever, but there are people out there that will, and that's self-evident, the demand that's out there. We need more affordable housing. We need, a lot of housing, I think, probably more than this project, frankly, which is probably not what people want to hear. So I just want to put that point out there because everyone's very self-interested in sort of how their life is affected by these things, but also think of the people who want to live in the city and don't have the opportunity, or who grew up in the city and won't be able to in the future because of this affordability crisis. Beverly's not going to solve it alone. Other towns need to do their part as well. But I would just kind of put that point out there for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Upala Rick Marciano, Ward 3. In the Beverly zoning ordinance, what is the purpose of zoning?
The purpose of zoning is to regulate land use.
And under a specific definition that we have in the ordinance, is there?
I don't have that memorized.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, that's all I have. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul Rossi, Ward 2, for the last 7 years, but with family roots for over 100. I'd like to ask a quick question with regard to Park Street and why that isn't being considered for rezoning or this overlay as well. It strikes me as odd that we've got all of this brand-new housing on Rantoul and then proposals for additional housing on River, and then we're going to have this canyon of car shops and city garages and all these other somewhat dilapidated buildings in between those areas.
So you're talking about the one parcel in the corner of Park and Federal?
Well, all of Park Street, from Elliott all the way to Pleasant.
Why is it not in here? Why are we not rezoning it?
Oh, you're asking why we're not rezoning Park?
Yeah. Why isn't that included in this overlay?
Well, a couple reasons. One, when we last looked at this actively, which was 2017, was it not? We met extensively with property owners along the Park Street, West Dane, and that neighborhood, which is, remind me of the zone, it's?
IG.
It's IG, okay, industrial general. And that is a sector and a type of zoning that's really important in Beverly. Our IG, our commercial industrial, it's an important part of our tax base. It's an important part of jobs. So we've not wanted to put that at risk, and we made real commitments at that time to try to reassure, the property owners and the businesses in that area that isn't what was coming.
Okay, yeah, I understand the need for sustaining the business in that area. It just, I think there's going to be a sharp contrast if you're walking from downtown across Rantoul through Park Street and then over to the waterfront. It's just going to look out of place.
Well, I would say done right, it's a very popular style of living for a lot of people that really want to be in that setting. The adjacencies are not inconsistent for a lot of people.
All right, the other thing is I'd like to make my concern known with not just regard to the volume of traffic that we'd be adding to the area with up to 1,000 new housing units, which would bring possibly 1,200 cars to the area. So not only the traffic volume, but currently the city has demonstrated either their inability or their unwillingness to maintain the condition of the roads in the area with the current volume of traffic. I just can't even imagine what those roads are going to look like with another 1,200 cars.
So, thank you for that observation. I will share with you that I'm looking at my colleagues in the city council and myself, we have been spending record amounts on our roads and sidewalks for the last 3 years. Prior to that, we were spending significantly more than had been spent in 20 years prior. Now, I say that without casting any aspersions, okay? My predecessor built 7 schools, or a combination of building and renovating additions, 7 schools, solved several really long-term, multi-generational, stubborn flooding and drainage problems citywide. So there was a lot that my predecessor, Bill Scanlon, did. He also was mayor through 2 recessions, right? So of necessity, as a lot of things needed to happen and were happening, we weren't able to collectively put enough into roads and sidewalks, okay? So I think things were being done that had to be done, and there's more to be done. We together have been trying to address that each year with as much as we can. We've got, in this current year, the fiscal year that ends June 30, we've got $3.5 million put into roads and sidewalks. We're trying to match that with this coming year. I think that the challenge is the backlog is closer to $40 million. If you live in Ryle Side, some of you know well that the Bridge Street project is coming. We've been working on that. That's about a $12, $13 million project. We couldn't do that with our own funding. That had to come from the state. So we got on a list for state projects, and we've been working to get up into the funding on that list. And so a year from this summer, that's supposed to start, that project. It's going to start sooner for you folks because we've got to do some water main and sewer work in the neighborhood. So it's really going to start this year, and it's going to be going on for the next couple. We also are trying to resurface Elliott Street this year. Now, we're going to work really hard to make sure they're not going at the same time, right? And I will tell you that every one of my colleagues on the city council have been talking, talking a lot about roads and sidewalks and trying to get more done. We all want to do more of that, and it's a question of resources. And we did just update every 2 years. We have a company come in and evaluate the road surfaces. So every road and stretch of road in the city has a grade from 0 to 100.
And
You can
I'm
see
pretty
them.
close to 0.
Give me a shout. We can show the map was generated last Friday off of the results that just came in. I know now that I've said that aloud, councils are all going to want their copies of the map. I saw mine this morning for the first time. There's a lot to do. We do hear it. We are mindful of it. We're all trying to get that work done together.
Right, I just need to point out that I think that a plan to address that should be part of any new development.
The
other thing I notice is in the current budget,
I'm sorry.
one second, we're
okay.
collecting
Last sentence.
$4.5 million in excise tax revenue. Why are we only spending $3.5 million of that on roads?
No. I appreciate this. I do. And look, everybody here has got the right to say what's on your mind, too. I guess I'd invite you to maybe have a further conversation with Councilor Rand and or me or us together. We're undertaking our work for next year's budget, and there are many, many demands that come in there. So anyway, thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, my name's Mike Hill. I'm a Ward 2 resident, and I'm also the foreman at Hill's Yacht Yard, which is the property is owned by Desmond's, but we lease the property. 3 years ago, Windover came in and they looked at the property. Desmond's wanted $3 million for it. Windover wanted nothing to do with it because there are 16 wells on the property to measure the contamination that has come over from the electric company. That's one problem, the contamination in the river. But if someone were to buy that property, it would have to be raised to the elevation that the electric company made theirs to prevent it from flooding. I've lost thousands and thousands of dollars in tools and equipment from flooding in that area, in that shop. But if someone were to buy it, another reason that the Windover didn't want it is because the seawall that the Desmonds put in the 60s or early 70s is caving in. It's going to cost millions just to fix that. Now, if the person who purchased it has to make a walkway, and that's an added expense, would the city be willing to pitch some money in to help make that walkway? And the other thing is, I don't understand why that side of Bridge Street is being rezoned just because someone spent an exorbitant amount of money for River Street Grill before it was even rezoned. He paid an exorbitant amount of money over what they were asking, hoping for rezoning. I don't understand why our side of the Bridge Street is up for rezoning. I don't get it.
Well, that's been part of the plan since 2000. Before they bought it, that was always that whole area was always considered as part of the study area back from the 2014 plan. So they probably were looking at that plan, with hope when they purchased the property. But yeah, it's always been one contiguous area of proposal for the Bass River Overlay District. It has nothing to do with the purchase.
Since 2014?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, actually, since before. Yeah, no, Mike, I appreciate the intel and the thoughts on the different parcels. This does go back in the slide Darlene put up earlier. I mean, this has been a topic of conversation in the city for over 20 years. The idea of an overlay or a rezone or something along the Bass River has been part of the conversation as to how to meet our housing and economic development needs, and that's why we're talking about it.
Yeah. Well, I know Mr. Desmond, who passed away, he wanted to sell.
Oh, I know. I know.
One of the three do not.
Yeah.
And I hope he doesn't. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Nobody else? You're all set? Last chance. Okay. Thank you.
Speak now.
20 years ago, I could have leaped over these fences. Good evening, everyone. My name is Richard Vincent. I'm a resident of Ward 2. My wife and I own a condo on Mulberry Street, right between Cabot and Rantoul, so we live right in the heart of the downtown, and we really appreciate all the activity that's been going on. We saw Rantoul Street before it is what it is now, where you really wouldn't have even wanted to walk down the street. You just really didn't feel safe during those days. So, I understand people's concern. They don't like change, but sometimes change is positive, and it's worked well for my wife and I. My question is kind of, the focus of the Bass River redevelopment and the area that it is in, I assume also has to deal with transit-orientated development. And the depot train station, I think we're number 2 on the line as the most active train station. So with the train station in mind and the affordable housing that would be going up in that area, will there be pedestrian access designed, for easy access to that train station? As it was mentioned before, make it easy and they will use it.
I think the planner may have a better answer, but I'll say quickly, if this goes forward and at some point it's redeveloped, certainly a part of the priorities for us all are to connect Odell Park, the post office, Odell Park, Rantoul, on across and through the train station and on down to the waterfront. And on either side of the train station, when you think of the Pleasant and Federal Street underpasses as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's really what it's all about, so, yeah. Okay, thank you.
I would just add to Rich's question. Thank you. One of the interesting things about our depot train station is that it is privately owned. So that would be, we'd have to work with the property owners in making sure we can have a path that runs through it. Otherwise, we work with our city streets to get around, but to get kind of, I think it would be a good idea to have something that goes kind of across and through, and hopefully that was something that they'd be willing to work with us on.
Hi. I'm Heidi Bissell, Ward 1. So I know that there's talk about maybe instead of 2 cars, just 1 car allowance. Would that be like set in stone that you could only have 1 car? For each unit?
Do you want us to answer that, Heidi, now, and then?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, the 1 cars, the 1 cars limit, a 1 car requirement, required 1 car, 1 space per unit, tends to, around transit stations, train and other, tends to attract folks who only want to have 1 car, or in some cases, no cars. That doesn't mean that everybody who moves in, who has moved into any of the Rantoul Street redevelopments has only brought 1 car. I think that's something that we've learned from, and we're looking at how to put that into the language of this zoning so that we get what we're looking for there in every instance. There's not, as you know, looking around there, there's not anywhere, there's not really proximate on-street parking to look to as well. So anything that happens down there really needs to be accommodated on site, in addition to any parking needed for a commercial property that may go along with it.
Okay. Another question I had was, or a concern was about the schools. And I know that you think everybody that's going to move into these places are not going to have any children, or, are going to be professionals just taking the train. I'm a retired elementary school worker, and I know, we built new schools, and we built them at the time when the class size was small. So we built a lot of schools that have smaller rooms for these kids. Now, the school that I was at, when I ended, we had kids' classrooms we had to take away the science lab. We had to have kids in the music room. We had to have classes in the computer lab. So, that's a concern. I'm worried. We can't guarantee that there's going to be all professional couples in these homes. And how do you account for how many kids you think may come into the system? And I know, people who have owned homes, North Beverly and whatnot, that have sold their homes to move into these places on Rantoul Street, because now they're empty nesters and whatnot. And now you've got families and larger families buying their homes, which just makes the school system overrun.
So we hear this concern a lot. I'm glad you bring it up, and I appreciate it. Couple thoughts. This year, the incoming kindergarten class is lagging so much in enrollments that the superintendent had asked me to help publicize that the enrollment period's open. It may prove to be the smallest class in the district this coming year. An anomaly, maybe, probably. But just, year to year, you don't know what's coming until you really get to kindergarten, and in a lot of cases, to 1st grade as well, because some keep the kids home or go private kindergarten. In terms of what the downtown, more transit-oriented type of housing that we have in Beverly, mostly along Rantoul, in terms of what it brings, we've now 3 times in the last 8 years done counts. We go to the school district, we look at the addresses, we count up how many kids are enrolled in the Beverly Public Schools. And what we have found each time is somewhere between 1 child per every 34 units of housing, up to 1 child per every 40 units of housing. So the point being that, while there are some children there, and it all depends on what the parents are looking for, right? Some may have a child or 2 there and then look for a house with a yard. Some may want to raise a child in that setting. That's all personal, right? But what we see is consistently that low a number. When you say that some people will sell their home in another neighborhood and then move into one of these buildings, of course, and we want that. And we also need for people to sell their homes to a young family that wants to move into them, because in a sense, that's really how our school population keeps coming. We all live in neighborhoods like that, right? My neighborhood was built in 1955. We still have some original owners, and we've had a lot of, families move in. I mean, some of the families that first moved in, their kids are now in and out of college, and then we got, toddlers on bikes with no pedals, right? So, that's how neighborhoods kind of turn over, and I think that's how we generally repopulate our schools.
Right, I know. There's just so much building going on that,
You're right. We've had some of these conversations before. Beverly's population is about 42,000. We have more housing units and smaller household sizes. And we also understand that we have more cars, and, we keep coming back to that. I think that's an area where we're going to continue to put some real work into.
Yeah, I was just going to give this stat. So in the average household size has gone down so much nationwide and everywhere, but in the 1960s, 70s, there was an average of 3.5 people per household. Some households were much larger. Now the average household size is 2.1. So that is why it seems like more housing units, but the population is not rising as fast, right? So that's kind of how that works out.
We have some more people in the back. Go ahead. Hi, my name is Mary Roy, and I've lived in Beverly for 8 years. And I guess my concern is just what it would look like as far as when you're coming down the street. And no one's spoken tonight about how high these buildings are going to go. And I know that was a concern when we were over at Ayers. And as far as when you're looking at Beverly, I don't want just this wall of apartments or condos. All I can think of is what's in Salem now and all those yellow, when you're coming into Salem by the train station, and I just feel like there's not enough space to have before when it was spoken about 5 stories high? So that just seems, to me, too high for that space. And I think that's what people, there's lots of people have these fears, but it just seems for that space and for that to go that high and for the size of the roads, is there going to be like an artist rendering anytime soon as to what this could look like?
So we're not doing a development, this is not a development plan. So we're creating a framework or proposing a framework that could say what the envelope or what they could build to, what the limits are. Each developer, any developer who comes in is going to have their own plan. We have done some schematics, or we've had our consultant has done, they're more like blocks. But they do help to show different scales and different types of buildings and different types of setbacks and different ways of treating the design. And some of those are available on the website, but there will probably, as we wrap up that project through June, there'll be some more specific information that we'll share that could illustrate it's not going to be an actual plan of what is going to be built, but it gives a sense of height and bulk and what things could look like in those parcels. So I think that could help you. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Just to add to that, we haven't been asked about height yet tonight, and so we don't want to just gloss over it. When we talk about, and I understand some people would be fine with nothing going on here. I get that. But when we talk about housing needs generally and affordable housing needs, and both the need to make that riverfront resilient against climate change and the desire to make that riverfront more accessible, enjoyable for the public, and then the need for whoever might build something to build it the right way, so that it's resilient and that it doesn't contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. So you look at all those things and the question becomes, we can put a lot of words on a page and say we're going to get this, 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 and this, and then we can along with it say, but you can only build 2 stories. Or you can only build 3 stories, or you can only build X number of units per acre. And that's where we're going to have to really work hard at understanding, what's the right formula. And it may be, and we've talked about potentially a lower size building fronting on the river. And when I say fronting, back however many feet is public, right? And then a bit higher building fronting on River Street, for example. But, you know, that's where Darlene talked about different schematics. Well, we've got a design standard effort underway to figure out what's the right design to require along the Bass River if we do this, along Rantoul, along Cabot, and other parts of town. And that's what that project is. It's separate from this, but it's connected. Thanks.
I asked her to go before me because I didn't want to follow my wife. My name's Steve Bissell. My wife spoke before. I live on Ashton Street. I've been a Beverly resident, you can say, for all my life. In the drawings, you showed a 4/1, which is 4 stories above 1, which is parking on the first floor because of flooding and everything, which would then give you 4 stories. So you're looking at a 50-foot-plus building along that whole embankment. You also showed, she talked about the requirement of 1 parking space. That would be a I'm just making sure this is right. That's a requirement of you have 1 parking space per unit, correct? So in essence, what that does is it gives more parking space availability so you can create more units. So in essence, that's really an enticement for a developer. Because you now have the ability to put 50 cars, you can now have 50 units, where if you had 2 cars per unit, you could only have 25 units. So in essence, that's a change that would benefit a developer. And by overlaying this area, you're really, yes, you're benefiting if we change the zone, yeah, okay, so everybody benefits, we get a walkway and all that, which nobody uses down there anyways. But besides that, you're enticing people to sell property is what you're doing, and you're making developers richer. I mean, the gentleman mentioned Windover. Windover's had their eye on this whole area for a long time, and they've wanted to develop this area. Developers want it, and they want it because it's money. It's money in their pocket. If that property gets redeveloped as residential, it's not going to be affordable. You can say, okay, well, we're going to require X number of units, but it's extremely difficult for you to be able to do that, and for a developer, when you have all the infrastructure that you're going to have to do along the walkway. As he said, there's a lot of money there, so I don't see how this area is going to end up with affordable housing. I really, really don't. And if you take all that traffic that's going to be in there, it's going to be a tremendous burden on the residents within that whole area. I mean, the real essence should be, okay, can that area really support an additional 1,500 to 2,000 cars every day? That should be the basis behind the redevelopment of that area. Can you really do that? And honestly, I don't think people have looked at that. I think that's a valid point for all the people that live in that area. It's going to affect them. Yes, we need more affordable housing. My kids have I have kids that can't live in town. I mean, I'd love to live in Nantucket. Guess what? I can't afford it. So people can't afford to live in Beverly. I mean, it's a fact of life. We all have to understand that. We can't all do and afford everything that everybody else has, or live where everybody else is living.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thanks.
A couple of thoughts for Steve. So, Steve, I appreciate your comments. You point out this tug and this challenge in trying to work through this. Now, we do require affordable units in our inclusionary zoning ordinance. I think we've all agreed, or I know I agree with those of you who say it's not enough, and we're looking to increase that requirement. What you're saying is, if we put that requirement on the table together with other things, then nobody's going to build, right? And that's really where we're trying to find a formula that brings all of those things, and also doesn't bring 1,400 units of housing, doesn't bring 1,000 units of housing. right? It was never 17, that was, I think, poetic license somebody was using, but 1,400 was the upper end of one schematic you saw, right? And then more recently, when we met last, we had an updated schematic from UTO.
700.
That showed the upper end at 1,000. I think it's been expressed, and we've agreed that 1,000 is too high. So we're trying to find a formula that brings that down and still allows some of what we believe is necessary and some of what people are looking for if a redevelopment happens. So, you know, it's still to be, we're seeking that still, okay? And that's a part of what tonight is about and the conversation going forward.
Any other comments, or we will invite Susie and Hannah to wrap up?
All right.
If you're going to wrap up, let me just say thank you to everybody. We really do. Oh, no, you can say it too, Susan. You can say it too, but I just, you know, this all matters, and we're grateful for people's concerns and willingness to engage. Thanks.
Yeah, definitely that. This is what it's all about. Just wanted to quickly talk about next steps. Our friends in Rowside are be hosting another forum similar to this on April 12th, 7 o'clock at the Ayers Elementary School. And for more information, you can contact Rowside Civic Association. And the next things, I think Darlene went over this earlier, but if you go to the city website, and look for the Bass River area study, new zoning. It has all the information on this. I'm sure these slides will all be added. It's got places where you can connect to send your comments directly to Darlene. And please stay engaged and contact your city councilors, your elected officials. It's all very important. And I will echo what the mayor just said. Love that everybody came out tonight and participated. And before I had to give it to Hannah to finish the thank yous, I want to thank especially the executive committee for pulling this together at a breakneck speed. You have no idea, and the city for helping us put it together.
So echoing what Susie was saying, we want to thank the city for allowing us to use the space and for making time for us. It was a tight squeeze getting this meeting in. So thank you so much for that. And we want to thank Rowside Civic Association for getting the conversation started and for demonstrating the need for public forums, and we hope to see you there at the next forum they're having. We want to thank City Council and the city staff, their planning, all of that. It's been a long evening for you guys. I know I've had a long day myself, but I know that you guys have back-to-back meetings, so thank you very much for making time to attend. And we want to thank BevCam for being here and recording this and streaming. We want to thank viewers, both here and online or on TV. Thank you for watching us. The participants, I want to thank our speakers, right? The really thoughtful points that they had, the questions posed. And then we want to thank the audience for their questions. Members of Ward 2 Civic Association, thank you. And friends of the association, thank you very much. The board, we want to thank yourselves. And if you'd like to join us, we're all about conversation and partnering together and just keeping a polite conversation. We don't like heavy fist fight debates, so please support us. We have memberships available. Thank you, everybody.
We have to walk. Either.
Do you know how to walk the